I've never seen any of these people before. It's like we weren't here earlier. Well, cool. Hey, I get to be the host. This is kind of awesome. Welcome to the Rooster Teeth Full Sail University live stream event. This is the first of many live streams we'll be doing, kind of covering the pipeline of animation. And we're here at Hall of Fame Week.
Yeah! Not only are we here at Hall of Fame Week, though, right now we're streaming, I believe, on roosterteeth.com.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. Surprise, folks.
Hi.
You're on the internet.
Wow, I didn't realize you were that excited about being on the internet. That's awesome. I am Chris Kokinos, and I am joined by my lovely partners in crime, Miles Luna and Jordan Swears.
Hello.
Hi.
And these wonderful Full Sail educators, AJ Viviani and Sean Springer.
Good to be with you guys.
Yeah. So, we had a lot to talk about, especially previs. I feel like we've talked about this before almost.
Yes. So this is, the second year in a row now where Rooster Teeth has partnered with Full Sail to do some really cool stuff. Last year, we sent some folks, Chad James, Brian Riley, a few people from Rooster Teeth to come here, speak and talk with you guys. Gus was here.
Yeah.
Gus gave a keynote last year.
Miles is doing it this year, I guess.
Yeah, Miles.
This year. And I'm so not nervous at all.
When's your keynote, Miles?
Doesn't show.
Keynote's going to be tomorrow. I was going to talk about failure, and then Gus was like, I did that. And I was like, I mean, never mind. I'll do something else. But yeah, no, last year we focused a lot on games, which was really cool. We got to check out a game that was made here,
Fury Strike,
which
two
is
of the
super
boys
cool.
right there.
Yeah. It was this awesome 80s beat 'em up thing. Yeah, now, as you were saying, we're going to focus a little bit on, this year, the animation pipeline.
Yeah.
And this is just the first in a series of talks that we're going to do in partnership with some Full Sail people.
Yeah.
In addition to that, we're making a cool special RTAA episode, Rooster Teeth Animated Adventures, starring Gus, and he's going to, the whole video is him walking through the animation pipeline stage by stage, and that's going to premiere at RTX.
Yeah.
So that'll be cool too.
Yeah, and if you don't know what RTX is, it's our convention that we do in Austin, Texas, and it's happening 4th of July weekend.
Yeah,
this
July
year.
5th through the 7th, I think?
The 5th to the 7th, yeah, that's right. Wow. I'm just so excited to be here. I've been like this all day, by the way.
It really is. It was super cute. We did a tour of the campus and everything, and the whole time Chris was like, I know this. I've been here. He was like
amazing.
Hermione Granger, oh, I know the answer to this trivia question. Cool, Chris.
I wasn't pompous about it, was I?
No, you were just
good.
being giddy.
It was adorable.
All right, but yeah, let's talk about some animation.
So these two fellows here are instructors for the 3D animation course here at Full Sail.
Guilty.
Yeah, put it that way. So we're going to talk a little bit about previs today, and I was wondering if you guys can tell us a little bit about what that is.
As a matter of fact, we can. We can
Thank
help you out.
God.
Oh man, I was really worried.
I know. I've never been here before, so this is crazy.
I don't know.
Previs, as it turns out, is kind of a colloquial the biz term for pre-visualization.
Never
I feel
would
like there
have
should just
guessed
be an asterisk up here. Someone could do that in real time. But really what previs does is most industries, depending on whether you're doing TV animation, film animation, this can vary. Basically what pre-visualization does is you're trying to create sort of 80% of the story in 20% of the time. You're trying to get really far out there with the concept so that you can iterate very quickly and see what something is going to look like before you spend a bunch of money and figure out, this actually doesn't work. So that's basically the short answer, I guess.
It's a good answer.
It's like the roadmap, so to speak, of a big sequence or something.
Right.
Yeah. I remember when we were working on our first feature, our live action feature, Laser Team, one of the 3D animators did a previs sequence for the big fight at the end, the big fight that takes place at a high school football field. And I hadn't read the script or known anything about the movie, so I had seen the ending because he was working on it behind me, and I kept hearing the dialogue and seeing the cuts and stuff. And then when I watched the movie, I was like, oh, this is what that was.
Right.
And then it clicked, just now, previs.
Yeah, and it's interesting that like with previs too, depending on whether it's like fully animated or if it's live action, maybe like Game of Thrones, let's say, if you have a girl that's riding a dragon and it's going to burn up a city or something. If something like that were to happen, just you would figure out how to do those things sort of in a broad sense, very rough as an idea. You wouldn't just go in and say like, hey, we're just going to do this thing and it's going to work out perfectly. So. Not saying that that's exactly.
Yeah.
So I've had the great pleasure of being able to work with a 3D animation pipeline and a 2D animation pipeline, but for a while I've kind of just lived in the writing zone. And I was wondering, so because I've heard of previs before, and then I also know pre-post, but I've never really known like where exactly that line is drawn between the two and like what the difference is.
I think it kind of varies from studio to studio depending on the scale of the production. If it's a live-action movie, it's going to be a lot more robust. It's almost fully animated. If you see something like Golden Compass or something like Spielberg would produce, then if you see the animatics that they create or the previs, it looks like an animated movie. They use a lot of motion capture. They
kind of play blasty, right?
Yeah.
You would say? Like,
yeah.
Okay.
Like
especially with like
lit or
Viewport
anything.
2.0, you can make it look really nice. But you were mentioning 2D. So if you do 2D, it started out we would have storyboards. Then you put that up on reels. We would look at it, and then it moved to the animatic stage. So it just depends on how much money you have.
Doesn't always.
I know for our production on Camp, it's our storyboards get laid into an animatic, but the boards are pretty mostly just like key pose heavy. It's more beat to beat. Some of the in between, most of the big moments in between one pose or another is kind of left up to the animator. So it's a very very rudimentary kind of previs. It's totally different than like what was on Laser Team, for instance. So I guess there are different.
It's supposed to be quick and dirty. Get it up there. So
It's like just get it. It's again iteration. You're trying to figure out, can this work without a lot of cost, a lot of time.
But before you start animating it, hopefully.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
See, obviously, that takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
So do you say there are a lot of iterations that come from this, like again and again and again to get it right?
The goal is you want to try and get it done the first. Obviously, with anything, you want it done right the first time. You try to shoot for that, but of course, that's.
Yeah.
That's how a producer would want it out. Well, you're not
We're
saying
always
have
at their
your
best,
way,
I guess, right?
producers.
Well, if you watch a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, you can see the directors with their previs people right there with them, and they like the what was it, War of the Worlds. You see Steven Spielberg, and he's looking at this city scene, and he's like, I want that freeway to fall on those houses, and I watched one of the behind-the-scenes things, and the previs guy went home that night, came back the next morning, and it was like, it looked beautiful. It was like fully animated, but so you kind of have to know a lot of different things. You have to be a jack of all trades. You have to be able to do Maya, After Effects, and maybe Motion Builder, and be able to kind of figure out things on the fly.
So is there anything in particular you guys as instructors teach to the students here to help them with, that kind of previs?
Motion capture, animation, everything. They get a chance to do everything. And, we generally focus on one discipline per student, because if you're going to create a demo reel for animation, you don't want to send it to a studio with a bunch of different things, because then they're like, what am I looking at? If you're an animator,
Which
you're an
one does he
animator.
do?
all the pieces.
Right, but the thing is, if you get into previs, and I've done some research on this, like for some of the stuff that's happening now, it seems to me like it's kind of like what it was like in the old days, like especially with animation, where you would study, you would work on art, you would learn all the principles, and then you would get into a studio, and that's when your education really begins. You know just enough to get there, and if as long as they like you, then they'll bring you under their wing, and then they'll train you, and you'll learn their pipeline. Because I think they're all different. From what I can see, some of them are so sophisticated now. They have motion control camera setups where they do these, on the fly, camera moves, and then they can digitally backtrack it. So I can't even.
The camera sequence.
Yeah, stuff I've never even dealt with. So there's a lot of scale to it,
Right.
So does this kind of let me ask it this way rather? Do different forms of media, animation to live action film or anything like that, does that change the process?
I think so. Like I've worked on different productions. One of them we had plates that we had to animate to, so the layouts were kind of a mishmash of different elements. Then other one was a feature. That's everything's created in the shot. So I think it just depends on the production.
I mean, it can depend on. I mean, I guess there's maybe four. There's the mediums, which is is it fully animated or is it live action? Or I guess maybe you could say there's a hybrid, like live action and visual effects heavy. Those things, as far as the medium is concerned, I think that actually your process is still going to be fairly similar, even if it's live action. You could still use, if it's VFX heavy, you could still use that. Now, if it's television or film, that's where I think there's the biggest
Right.
Yeah.
Because in television, you might completely subvert the whole layout process. You're like trying to just get shots out and film.
Tell me about it.
Guys, I don't have to tell you. Yeah, right. So film of course is much longer form. So they're trying to get it right the first time with a little bit more on the front end.
I mean, I've experienced that difference just within our own animation department between working with the 3D team and the 2D team. I sort of fell into a 3D animation pipeline because my earliest work at Rooster Teeth was with Red versus Blue. And when we started working on seasons that involved some hybrid machinima and CGI shots and things like that, working with the 3D pipeline, we have like a full layout department where we'll go in, we have like a rough animatic for something, and then we go to the layout team and they sort of like set the camera, they put all the relevant sets, characters, and props in the scene, and then they hand it off to the animator. They do all their stuff. And then it comes back for a final layout pass where maybe we'll add like a little bit of sway, or maybe we'll go like, let's actually move this light to better highlight this thing. And I was like, cool, yeah, I understand layout and some previs things. Neat, sparkle. But then I had the good fortune of getting to do stuff with the 2D team, and it was so different. There were still a lot of fundamentals that were still the same, but one thing that I learned very quickly was, storyboards for 2D, like that's the shot, you guys. Like with 3D, we'd kind of do like a rough approximation of, I'm thinking a shot sort of like this, but with 2D, like you need to be able to match, like the background needs to be exact, the sizing needs to be exact, the poses need to be like, unless there's like a change that comes later on down the line, like those keys need to be exact. And then it was as the process went on to things like actual background and environment art, like I was learning things like, oh yeah, in 2D you need to like bake in the shadows into the background, so you need to know where the light source is, and I never even thought about that. And so just between those two departments, I experienced a great deal of differences. And I think also a lot of it goes back to how much money did we have?
It's interesting. It's interesting to see from my perspective, being audio, how previs or storyboarding even would interface with us. Have you ever experienced maybe working with VO or something like that when storyboarding out an idea?
I'm sorry, what was that?
So I guess the question is, have you ever in the storyboard process, have you ever worked alongside, say, some temp VO or something like that to help kind of drive the storyboards themselves?
We usually do scratch track ourselves. You kind of have to act out things, and sometimes you'll have actors who will do it, and you can go off some of the track, but if you are doing something from scratch, it's usually us. So if you watch like the reels, you'll see a lot of the story artists, and you'll hear really bad recordings, but you just kind of do what you have to do.
If I remember correctly, somebody Google this or whatever, but if I'm not mistaken, I think the hamster from Bolt was like a VFX artist or something on the film.
Oh,
and
wow.
He ended up, they were like, you did awesome. Like, we're just going to use that. So sometimes it does happen.
He was just doing the temp VO
He was just doing temp voice. Yeah, and they ended up, I'm pretty sure.
Same with
something like that happened
the guy
to me.
who does the voice of Pinocchio. He was a storyboard artist, yeah.
Oh my God.
So it can happen.
We had
one of you.
We had something similar to that happen at Rooster Teeth recently. I don't know how many people are familiar with one of our latest 3D shows, Genlock. Yep. It was a really big project with a lot of stuff behind it and a lot of big names attached to it. But before we could record those big names, we had to get going with animatics and boards and things like that. And just to help start moving things along, we needed to get a rough edit lock. And in order to do that, we had our director and seasoned voice actor, Gray, voice every single character in the show.
We called it Greylock.
And it started off funny.
But
at the end of it, the animators were like,
oh, yeah.
If I have to listen to his Scottish accent one more time.
It got confusing for a while there, too, at the very beginning, because I think they had to append the names like in the actual storyboards themselves, because I was like, Okay, which one is this
talking?
now?
Yeah.
Who's talking?
Right.
So, well, cool. I think we might go ahead and start shifting over to some Q&A.
Hey, what's up?
Howdy.
Person who's never asked us a question before.
Especially not about previs.
First time.
So what does the ideal previs reel look like, and what should I put on my reel?
Ooh, very good question. For a student out of this school, I would probably say the concentration, if you're going through, I would concentrate most on animation and definitely like film. You need to be thinking as a filmmaker. You're not just an animator, you're not just a modeler, you're not just a rigger. Like, you need to be thinking about setting up shots, study film, study sequences of film, not just a shot. I mean, it's good, obviously, to understand, rule of thirds and all that kind of awesome stuff. But how does a shot transition to another shot? If you're telling a sequence of action, that's really what previs is. It's not just one thing. Like, sometimes when we're animating, we're thinking, all I do is move this character from here to there, and he does a cool thing, and he farts or whatever, whatever happens.
That's the
fun.
coolest thing.
But, you have to think more broadly.
Yeah, I would say also motion builder is a big thing, because if you're going to be dealing with motion capture data, you have to know how to deal with FBX files and importing. And I know a lot of stuff also for people who are in the game art program or even CA. It's good to do to get comfortable with Unreal. There's a lot of stuff being done in the Unreal Engine now.
Cool.
So if I wanted to get into previs, like what should I start focusing on now in school and like maybe even afterwards?
Honestly, I would say whatever class that you're in, like we've had lots of students who are like, oh, I want to be a modeler, so I'm not really going to work too hard in this class, or I'm just going to do don't be like that.
Yeah.
Whenever you start something new, full force.
Take each thing seriously.
Yes.
And even if you think that it's like an ancillary, like side thing, like I don't want to do this, like you were saying, it still does like benefit you. Like, you might think like, oh, I'm a painter, I don't sculpt, but who knows? You might, like, if you get into sculpting or painting or whatever, those things can sometimes surprise you how they might, pull you back in, and you'll learn something from it.
And I would also say, look to the industry and look at stuff that you like. And see, for me as a traditional animator, when I started doing animation, I knew all the people that I liked, so I would try to emulate what they did. It's easier that way. Then you can go, well, I like ILM. I like what they do. Who's the guy or the girl who's making these really cool shots or previs things? Find out who they are, and then go look the reel up. And then it's like, I remember when I developed my first portfolio, I would take images of stuff that I wanted to create and build my portfolio, then I would take it out and put my drawing in there to replace it. So if you look at a reel that's really awesome from, let's say, ILM, and Joe Schmo made that, look him up, find out all the things that he's done, and sometimes you can even get in contact with these people. But I always would say I would emulate the place that I want to work. And for 2D animation, Disney was always the standard, so everyone would create a portfolio that was the Disney portfolio. Then as you work in the industry, you develop your own stuff, but you'd have life drawing, you'd have quick sketches, you'd have, sometimes you would have some animation type drawings, but most of it was just classical drawing. But then you had a really solid thing you could show people because they were the standard. So I would say in like VFX or animation or whatever area you want to move into, if you have something that you can emulate after or work from, or work towards, I should say, it makes it easier because you have a goal. You're like, I like that. I want to do that.
Any other questions? Oh, there you go. Hi.
This one? So for a show like Ruby that is really heavy on choreography, how difficult would it be to do the previs, and what would the process for that be?
So I haven't directed Ruby, but I did direct several seasons of Red vs. Blue with some intense choreography, so I can't speak 100% to specifically Ruby, but we definitely do treat fights as a special case. A lot of times we have storyboard meetings where we sit down with a storyboard artist or two from the layout team, and we go through a script together. We shot list it together. It's very collaborative. Sometimes it's very heavily led by the director, and other times the storyboard artist might come with something already in mind and kind of pitch that and pick and choose. But when it comes to a fight, a lot of times, first you start with the script. Sometimes a fight is just an and normally I'm kind of paraphrasing here, but like let's say you just want an action beat that you have the budget for like 90 seconds of action, and the characters start here and they need to end here. We typically will know which animators that we want to assign to this fight. You know, maybe if it's going to be a fight that has a lot of acrobatic moves, we know the strengths and weaknesses of our animators, and we go, okay, well, this person's going to be great at this, and this person is trying to get good at this, but still needs a little bit to learn. So let's pair these two together. Let's bring them in, and we'll have kind of like our own separate meeting about it. In the past, we've brought in professional fight choreographers sometimes to sort of pitch some ideas. Other times, we've had fights get almost entirely created by a storyboard artist who had like a really good idea for something. But a lot of the times, it's just super collaborative. If you get all the people who are going to have their hands on that fight into the room, and you start talking. Other times there'll be moments in a script where very specific things need to happen, where we need to set up moments that will happen in a later episode or maybe even in a later scene. And so you'll go through and you say, okay, these are the things that this fight needs to accomplish. This character needs to have this item by the end of it. This character needs to take this kind of damage before the end of it. And this character needs to go from here to here. Then you look at how much time do we have in the episode, which is typically governed by how much time do we have to work on this thing, and you just start working backwards. How many people do we need to put on this thing? How much time is it going to take? And once you have all the people who can answer all of those questions in the room, it's going to go a lot smoother than just having one person saying like, "This is what it's going to be. I want pictures of Spider-Man." That typically doesn't go super great. So it's just constant communication from as many people that will need to be involved as possible.
It takes a village to get those Spider-Man pictures.
Sure does. No one's done it yet.
Cool. Well, that about wraps us up. I want to thank AJ and Sean for joining us on stage and talking about things.
It's an honor.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
And I want to thank Full Sail University, Hall of Fame Week, all of y'all for coming out. It's awesome. So before we go, I just want to mention again, we have RTX coming up in July 5th to the 7th, and Full Sail will be out there. They're going to bring the big old bus again, which is going to be awesome. No bus. All right. Well, I thought they brought it last year. That's sad. I like the bus. But they'll also be doing some intro to animation sessions and some other things, which will be really cool. And, this is the first of a few of these live streams we'll be doing. The rest of them will be online. You can check them out on the...
We have 3 of them, right?
We have 3 more.
Yeah.
3 more. So we'll be talking about other parts of the pipeline with some of the animators and artists and maybe even some sound people over at Rooster Teeth when we get back to Austin, Texas. So thank you again so much for coming out, and we'll see you out there.